What's up everyone, I'm Eldritch and welcome to another episode of Donkey Teachings, the show where I take a class of ships and a tier each week and then look at the representatives of that class and tier. This week we're looking at tier 3 destroyers and our first candidate is Wakatake. The Wakatake gets normal matchmaking, that means that she meets ships of tier 2 to tier 5. You're going to see any of 3 maps in Wakatake: Islands, Big Race and New Dawn. Now Wakatake has 3 big strengths. She's incredibly stealthy, has very high maneuverability, with a very strong engine, and she has incredibly powerful torpedoes for tier 3. And her biggest drawback are her guns. Her guns are very low DPS and the turret traverse isn't the best, but they do have higher alpha damage than comparable American destroyer guns. And as such they are generally good for shotgunning into enemies, but it does mean that your aim has to be a little bit better, because you don't get another chance for a salvo all that quickly. They also have a high fire chance, which makes them very good for setting fires to battleships and cruisers. The best part about Wakatake is that the low-level maps are absolutely tailored toward her. The weak low-tier battleships and the fact that there are generally less carriers at those lower tiers mean that Wakatake has free reign to do however she pleases, which generally involves sending battleships to the bottom of the ocean. The most important thing for any Wakatake player is to know how to take advantage of the map. All 3 of the maps that Wakatake is going to play on have a lot of islands and as such are really good for ambushing and taking cover, jumping out on someone, throwing out torpedoes, and then hiding back behind the island in order not to get shot. In the beginning of the game you generally want to try to take out at least one of the enemy destroyers. The less enemy destroyers there are on the map, the more free reign you have to take down pretty much any ship that you want. Once you have accomplished this without losing too many of your hit points, you launch attacks on slow enemies and take them out with your very dangerous torpedoes. The biggest thing to keep in mind with any Japanese destroyer is that your ship is also equipped with guns. On pretty much every Japanese destroyer, the guns are better than people think. They have better high explosive damage than the American counterparts, and they have a higher chance of setting targets on fire. They also have a flatter shell trajectory and higher velocity, which reduces their shell travel time. Because of the slightly worse turret traverse time on most Japanese destroyers, it is a little bit harder to make use of these guns, I know. But learning when to use your guns and learning how to prepare to pre-aim at points where you're going to get shots is definitely an acquired skill that, when properly used, separates the wheat from the chaff when it comes to Japanese destroyer captains. Now before I show you all my trade secrets in the replay, let's talk about the boring homework part. First off, ammo choices. You are actually going to be surprised at how good the penetration is on these Japanese destroyer guns. There are some cruisers that you can use AP against. Chikuma and Chester are a little bit of a fringe case, because their armor is good enough for you to actually penetrate and do damage, but their citadels are also not that easy to hit. So it's going to be a little bit harder to get citadel hits, and as such it might sometimes be better to just use high explosive to set them on fire. But against Tenryu, Kuma and Phoenix you absolutely want to use AP ammunition if they give you their sides. If they don't, obviously use HE as well, but if you can get their sides, you can totally wreck these ships and their captains will not see it coming. They will see a Japanese destroyer and think, they don't use their guns, guns are shit on Japanese destroyers. But they are not.
So do make sure that you read to them from the good book of Donkey.
For pretty much every other ship, you want to use high explosive. There's absolutely no way in hell that you are ever going to penetrate any battleship's armor. And so just fire high explosive at their superstructure to set them on fire. There's pretty much nothing that causes more rage in a battleship captain than to be set on fire by your destroyer. They absolutely hate that. And then you can go in close and harvest their tiers with your torpedo-shaped tier harvesting instruments. Carriers of course also have no armor, so they also get the HE treatment. And once again, remember to make use of your guns. Force yourself a couple of games to just fire your guns whenever you are in range, just so that once you see for yourself how good those guns actually are. Now for the commander skills and upgrades. Tier 1 commander skill, you definitely want situational awareness. I don't think there's a single destroyer in the game where I wouldn't want situational awareness. Knowing exactly when you get spotted and when you are no longer spotted is a very powerful ability for destroyers. It lets you know when you're safe and you can stop maneuvering like crazy. It lets you know when the enemy spots you and when you can safely fire your guns. And if you get spotted where you think you shouldn't be spotted, then aha! So it lets you know to keep your eyes open. Second tier is a little bit of a mixed bag. I generally go for the faster turret traverse because I do use my Japanese destroyer guns all the time. And having the faster turret traverse just makes it easier. I don't really see the need in buffing the torpedoes because the torpedoes on the Wakatake are already very good, and you're rarely going to be in a situation where you say, oh, if only I had 10% better reload. But I do think there's still an argument to be made for it. If you really never use your guns and you don't want to use your guns, even though Papa Eldritch says that's not correct, then you can take torpedo armament expertise, or you could go with fire prevention. It's pretty rare that you actually burn to death in the destroyer, but I guess it doesn't hurt. On tier 3, I take high alert. Now you might say, why not take superintendent? After all, it gives you an additional charge of smoke and an additional charge of your engine boost. That is true, but I very rarely get into a situation where I actually need an additional charge of both. Usually the game just ends before I need either one of them. I don't use premium consumables on my ship because I have a hard enough time making credits as it is, so I don't really need an additional charge because the long cooldown would just prevent me from using it anyway. And personally, I do think the repairability is very important on a destroyer. If you get your engine or your rudder knocked out and you can't repair that within a reasonable time frame, you're just dead, and then you just don't need a third charge of your smoke. But I do feel that arguments can be made for superintendent if you do run premium consumables on your Wakatake. At tier 4, last stand. Period. All the other skills are worse. Yes, you could slightly increase the gun range, but I don't really feel that's necessary, because generally you want to use the guns when you're already spotted, and you already have longer gun range than detection range. So if you're spotted, you're in gun range. No need for longer gun range. And on tier 5, I feel that both preventive maintenance and concealment expert are viable choices. Personally, I would choose preventive maintenance. I don't really play the hang back and only fire your torpedoes at maximum range style of gameplay. I play these low tier destroyers a bit more close up and reckless. And as such, 35% less chance to get my engine or rudder knocked out is so much more valuable to me than the slight improvement in stealth. You get a 600 meter reduction, which brings you to 5.5 kilometers. Now don't get me wrong, that is significant. It widens your stealth engagement zone. But again, I like to go in a bit closer anyway and prefer preventive maintenance. I think both of these skills are totally viable depending on which of these two styles you prefer. For the upgrade slots, there's not a lot of thinking required. Torpedo tubes modification is great. Reducing the repair time of your torpedo tubes and less chance of them getting incapacitated is absolutely crucial on a Japanese destroyer. And lastly, in the second slot, I use propulsion modification 1 on all of my destroyers. I think the worst thing that can happen to you in a destroyer is when your engine gets knocked out. And if somebody hits that zone, your engine gets knocked out. That's generally how that works. And as such, anything that helps reduce that chance is alright with me. And a look at Citadel hit zones. Oh wait, that's right, you're a destroyer, you're entirely made of Citadel. I'm of course just kidding, but as a destroyer you should definitely not ever get hit. But if you're firing at an enemy Wakatake, this is where you should aim to take out their engine or rudder. Taking out either one of these is going to put them dead in the water, and it's going to make it much easier for you and your team to take them out. So much for the theory, now let's look at the replay. Alright, and here we are with the replay for the Wakatake. And I was actually kind of tempted to use this replay in the review or in a Donkey Double feature because it's that damn good. But it's fine for the Donkey Teachings because it does show you a lot of how I like to play New Dawn. And I think New Dawn is one of the maps where low-level destroyers have the highest potential really for really good games. If you start in the southwest, like I did in this game, then you want to approach the center point, or if it's the standard conquest mode, then you want to approach the center atoll with these islands as your cover. You always want to be able to fall back between two of the islands to block shots from the enemy. If you approach from the northeast toward this atoll, then you want to go on the west side, be past the large island that is right in front of me in this shot. And then you want to go past the other two islands that I'm right next to now, and then you can side into the middle once you spot a destroyer. I spot a destroyer right here, and I decide to give 2 wide spreads of torpedoes, and I'm going for the engine shot, and I'm also getting the engine shot, perfect, and that should slow him down enough for my torpedoes to be on target, so if he doesn't repair and steer in, then my torpedoes are going to be definitely deadly. And they are. Wonderful. His torpedoes were also very well aimed, but I do manage to get out of the way just in time. He did actually not do a perfect lead on the gray, this is where you should shoot strip in his torpedo mode. He actually fired a little bit closer toward me because he anticipated me turning behind the island, which I did, so kudos to him. He definitely aimed his torpedoes pretty well, but it didn't save him in the end. Now, that smoke makes me think that there's another destroyer there. I mean, the smoke definitely came from the destroyer I just killed, but there we have another one coming from the east. And I get a decent hit on him, but that's not actually that important because I get some very good torpedoes and it doesn't appear like he's turning at all, which is of course a mistake because my torpedoes absolutely destroy him. Not a bad start, I would say. We're 3 minutes into this game and I have a first blood and 2 devastating strikes. But this is really how I like to play it on this map, is I like to take this center area and just completely dominate it, because as soon as you have this area, you can go to any place on the map really and do your destroyer thing. And also, you get rid of some of the enemy destroyers right at the start of the game, and that makes the game easier for your team in general. Randomly, one of my torpedoes actually strikes the Miyogi that comes down the eastern flank. Unplanned torpedoes are the best torpedoes. Trying to get my guns around fast enough so I can take a shot at this Wakatake, but I do not think it's going to happen. He is under so much fire. Yeah, there he dies. Now the next target definitely should be this Miyogi. I do have to be a little bit careful with our Phoenix there. He beached himself, which is really bad because there's torpedoes incoming from the rear, fired by this other destroyer, who is way too far in the back to fire torpedoes, but what you're going to do. And he does actually end up team killing our Phoenix, sadly, but it gives me the opportunity to sneak around this island and completely surprised this Miyogi. He did not see me coming at all and steered away from the island, and as such I only have to do a slight correction toward me, because even if he does steer into me now, there's nothing he can do, and he's never going to turn quickly enough to you know, drive away from my torpedo. So in that situation, there was nothing that battleship could do. He got himself into a position where there's just no escaping from the torpedoes. And I took advantage of it, and that's really what you have to do when you play a low-tier destroyer. When you're in higher-tier destroyers, as I demonstrate why the guns on the Wakatake are good, yes, I take some counterfire, but I'm not too worried. I want this kill, come on, and yes, it's mine. What was I going to say? Oh yes, when you're in high-tier destroyers, you have to be a lot more careful with how you play, because you're really just a support ship. Okay, high-tier destroyers are really not that good at the moment, balance-wise, and this destroyer once again displays that he has absolutely no idea what he's doing, firing his torpedoes from way too far away and just risking team damage. But when you're in low-tier destroyers, you are actually one of the strongest ships on your team. And as such, you have to take a little bit of the initiative and actually push forward and deal damage to the opposing team. Because in a way, your team does rely on you doing some damage to the enemy team. If you don't do that, then it's going to be difficult for your team to win, because the battleships and the cruisers at these tiers, while they're not necessarily bad, the battleships kind of are, but the cruisers aren't, but it takes them a lot longer to do their damage. And as such, you have to really jump in and do your part. Take some more shots at this guy, get 2 hits for a solid 2,000 damage. Again, showing why the guns on the Japanese destroyers are fantastic and you should use them whenever you can. And finished the guy off with my torpedo. I'm at 5 kills now, by the way. Just going to brag a little bit about this great game I played. But even despite the high kill score in this game, it's just a good example of how you should try and play your destroyers at these tiers. You have to go to the destroyer playground and dominate that area, because it generally will have an impact on who is going to win the game. We took that area in the beginning, and from then could basically encircle the entire eastern flank of the enemy team, and while we completely denied the western flank and didn't send anything up there, it gave us a chance to take out most of their ships. Don't get me wrong, they still have a lot of ships. It's not exactly decided yet, it's still pretty even, but it does give us the opportunity to now fragment them. I mean, look at the map. They have a cruiser down in the south who's chasing our carrier. We have this Tenryu who was also chasing the carrier but is now letting off, and there once again I set fire to the Tenryu and deal almost 2,000 damage to him. The guns on this thing are amazing, and that was slightly not enough lead given there to that salvo, but it's fine. I'm just going to reload casually, and then I'm going to make you pay for all your sins, Mr. Tenryu. He does get some hits on me. I blow him up, but he kills off my torpedoes and sets me on fire. Does also quite a bit of damage to me, so I really have to be very careful from now on. I pop my smoke, so I get undetected, but the Tenryu respots me. Wonderfully here, our carrier is doing some real work against this Tenryu. Amazing that the Tenryu actually got hit 2 or 3 times by this guy. It's impressive. But yes. The guns. You must not forget the guns. And I was talking about something else. I forget. It's fine. We'll just move on. But yeah, this is really how this has to work. You know, you have to take the center or take the destroyer playground, then destroy one of their flanks, and then split them off. Because generally at these lower tiers, players won't have the amazing teamwork capabilities that some of the higher level players might have. And as such, generally when one flank is undecided or decisively won, people will just sort of scatter in all kinds of directions, and then it's much easier for you as a destroyer to pick them off. As you just saw, I completely took apart that cruiser that came for the Hosho, and the Hosho took out the other cruiser, and as such we got rid of 2 more of them. Now, this is very unlucky. The Kuma aims a little bit too far ahead of me. It gave a bit too much lead, but one of them spread far enough from the pack to hit me just in the bow, and sadly I get taken out. But I do get 2 more torpedo hits against this South Carolina, bringing him down by about 40%, flooding him as well, but he does repair it and then repairs a bunch of his hit points afterwards. From here on, my team actually ends up winning, which is good, because, you know, with 6 kills it would really suck to lose a game. But yeah, this really does show pretty well how destroyers at these lower tiers work. You have to divide and conquer. You have to be the pivot that drives the team. You are basically the linchpin. At higher tiers, that changes. You become the support ship and the other ships become the focus of, you know, how the battle goes. So to sum up, the Wakatake is a very stealthy, highly maneuverable destroyer with guns that are generally undervalued. Its torpedoes are very strong. At lower tiers, destroyers are definitely a powerhouse ship class. And you as a destroyer player are absolutely capable of carrying your team. Don't be too afraid of the enemy. Take the areas with lots of island cover early in the game, fight off enemy destroyers, hopefully blowing up a few of them, and then divide and conquer the enemy team. Take advantage of them splitting up by hounding and taking down ships that have left the pack. Learn to use your guns to effect, and try to stay alive so you can deal as much damage as possible. Alright, that does it for this episode of Donkey Teachings. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something, and if you did, please consider liking and subscribing. If you have any feedback, leave it in the comments. The Donkey Teachings on Friday will be about the Wicks, and next week we're going to look at some battleships. But until then, I've been Eldritch Master Donkey, and I'll see you in another video.